Hi, and welcome to the 10-Minute Food Truck Training Podcast. My name is Bill Moore. I am a food truck business coach and author of Food Truck 101, Beginner to Winner. This podcast is all about helping you start and grow your food truck business. 37 years ago this month, my dad was diagnosed with his second bout with cancer. This time it was colon cancer. It was right before Thanksgiving when my mom told me what the doctor had found. You see, way back in 1971, about 13 years earlier, my dad had been diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, and if you don't know, that's a different form of cancer. And we were told back then that Dad had a 17% chance of surviving. Now, I was 12 years old in 1971, and I remember telling my grandmother that I understood math, and what that really means is he's got an 83% chance of dying. I was kind of a really cheerful guy, wasn't I? Dad went to Ohio State University Hospital, and he was there for a long time. He was actually in the hospital 33 days. And they did a lot of radical treatments with him. And then over the next several months, they even did more radical treatments with him. Chemotherapy and radiation and all different kinds of combinations of things. And after a few years of him going through all different kind of treatments, they declared that the cancer was under control and he would likely be a survivor. So in 1984, that Christmas I mentioned a few minutes ago, when my mom was telling me about the colon cancer, I fully expected another trip to Ohio State University and they would pull off another miracle. So I was so certain that this would happen, I drove Dad to Columbus, took him to the hospital up there, and waited with him for the results. The doctor that Dad had seen in the 1970s was still there. She was a little bit older and definitely a lot more weary looking, but she was still there. She remembered Dad, even though he hadn't seen her since about 7 years prior. She came out to meet me, which was unusual. She asked me to join her in the office with Dad, which was even more unusual, and I knew that the only possible outcome would be bad news. She explained that they needed to do surgery, and it wasn't a if we do surgery, it was we must do surgery. And I was thinking, that's awesome, the problem's solved, except it really wasn't. She explained that all they were going to do was make sure that Dad didn't die from having a blocked colon, because apparently that's a really painful and horrible way to die. She made it clear that Dad had a few months at best. The cancer had already spread to his lungs. It was all throughout his colon and was already getting into other vital organs. She said there was no amount of radiation therapy, there was no amount of chemotherapy would make any kind of difference. And if you guys haven't heard my story about my dad, in the 70s, they actually experimented on him with different types of radiation to get that Hodgkin's disease under control, and it worked. So she wasn't afraid of doing experiments. She just recognized there was nothing that could be done. There was no therapy that they could do at that point. As with many cancer patients, towards the end of the fight, my dad lost really any desire to eat anything. He kept saying that just everything he ate had no flavor, and he just didn't want to eat. Well, as he got weaker and weaker, I would come visit him every day after work. On my way home from my job in West Virginia, I would pass through his city and talk to him before I would head to my town. And during one of my visits, we started talking about baseball games and watching the Cincinnati Reds in Riverfront Stadium. We watched the Reds back when they were known as the Big Red Machine, and they were winning a lot. And my dad and I and my mom and sister went to see the Reds play pretty frequently. My dad was a huge baseball fan. On every one of those trips, my dad was a man of habit. He had two things he would want to do: stop at White Castle or stop at a Frisch's Big Boy. One or the other. We did that every single trip. The White Castle was downtown near Riverfront Stadium, so a lot of times we would just go eat that one. Because the Frisch's Big Boy was kind of outside Cincinnati, and always the timing wasn't perfect to eat there. But we always ate at one of the two. Every time we go to White Castle, my dad was, again, a man of habit, and he would say, I can eat a dozen. And most of the times he would eat about 5. So as he and I are sitting there talking, he is bedridden at this point. So if anybody was going to feed him, they would have to make the food, bring it to him, and then help him eat it, help him sit up and even try to eat it. So we're sitting there talking about the Reds and the ball games, and then of course White Castle came up and Frisch's Big Boy came up. My town had a Frisch's Big Boy. He wasn't interested in getting the Big Boy sandwich. He wanted a White Castle. And it turned out that ended up being his last food request. He said, if I could eat anything that would taste good, I know it's those burgers. Well, he didn't have to say anything else. I jumped in my car and I drove to Cincinnati, which was about 2.5 hours one way. Got him his White Castles, and I came home and delivered a bag of 12 White Castles to him. I microwaved one, and he ate about half of it. And he said, please save the rest for later. I know I'll eat them later. And this was on Sunday. He passed away on Tuesday, and he hadn't touched the other 11. According to Mom, that was the last thing he actually ate. I still eat those White Castle burgers. We don't have one here in Florida, where I am, but they do package them and send them out frozen to different grocery stores and Walmart. I've even got my sons hooked on White Castles, and I have shared a bunch of stories about their grandfather that they neither one got to meet, so that they know how important a White Castle burger is to me. The memories that are associated with those little teeny tiny sliders make them taste like steak to me. And when my kids were little and I would pull some out to eat and they noticed I was eating a White Castle, they would always say, Grandpa's favorite? And I would always respond, yes, Grandpa's favorite. Today, one of you is helping create that kind of a memory with one of your guests. You may not even realize it. The meals your guests purchase from you and share with their parents, their children, their friends is a memory that could last them an entire lifetime. Your food could literally be also someone's last supper. That, my friends, is the power of food. Take that responsibility seriously. That little kid eating your food today with their dad might be the one that's writing about the greatest food memory they've ever had, and it involves your food truck. How awesome would that be? Thank you guys so much for listening to the 10-Minute Food Truck Training Podcast. Make sure to rate us everywhere that you listen to podcasts, including Spotify. They just recently started a star rating system. If you guys are finding all the information helpful to your business, please consider becoming a monthly supporter of the podcast. Just hit the support button or follow the link in the description. Every little bit does help keep us going. If you guys like being around like-minded positive people, join our Facebook group. It's called Food Truck Training. We have a whole bunch of awesome members at all different levels, from dreamers to beginners to decades-old veterans. They're all there to help you and help each other succeed. And again, thank you so much for listening. Come back tomorrow because you know I got plenty more to say about the food truck business.